All right, I can't believe I'm making a rant review about a Brandon Sanderson book. What have I become? Hi, hello, how is everyone doing? Welcome, I'm Kat, and today is a very, very sad day. A day in which I'm gonna complain about a Brandon Sanderson book. Now look, listen. Before you nail me to the cross and throw tomatoes at me, I do like Brandon Sanderson. I've read almost all of his books. I love Stormlight Archive. I love The Arithmetist. I think his writing advice lectures are amazing. I even back his Secret Project Kickstarter. But, but, I just gotta complain about Cytonic. And this is not gonna be like an angry rant because I'm not angry. I'm just disappointed. Also, an obligatory disclaimer. This is just all my feelings and opinions. Obviously, I might be terribly wrong and just missing some deeper meaning to this book. Also, there's going to be another book in this series, so maybe the last book will make it all click together. Still, I think every book should stand on its own, even if it is part of a series. So, here are my thoughts on Cytonic. So, Cytonic is the third book in the Skyward series, the other two being Skyward and Starsight. Since this is the third book in the series, it's going to be very hard to discuss it without spoiling the first two. So I'm going to try and explain vaguely what my gripes were and then put up a spoiler warning before I go into like full synopsis and details. All right, so the story of Skyward starts at a human settlement on Detritus, an inhospitable planet besieged by alien forces. Luckily, the planet has this old defense system that mostly protects the underground human settlements, but they still need to have an air force to repel any alien attack that managed to slip through. Now, no one has seen these aliens, so they have basically been fighting an unknown enemy for as long as they can remember. The protagonist Spencer dreams of becoming a pilot, which is really difficult, especially for her since she's the daughter of a deserter. Her father, who was also a pilot, ran from the battle and was executed for it. But Spencer is determined to clear the family name, even if she has to sleep in a cave and deal with the ridicule and distrust of everyone around her. That's roughly the premise of the first book. It's a fast-paced YA sci-fi with lots of fun air battles, the characters are cute, there's mystery and humor, and it's just all around a really great book in my opinion. It's really fun, solid read, and it's one of my favorite books by Sanderson. Also, it's his first foray into the sci-fi genre, and I thought that it was an amazing start for the series. Second book, Starsight, continues the story. I'm not gonna elaborate because huge spoilers for everything, but in my opinion, it just wasn't as good. It felt like it was leaning away from sci-fi a little bit, which I wasn't a fan of, but it still had a lot of fun elements, great tension, great action, and a really scary threat that was introduced throughout the book. So in general, I thought, yeah, it was still a good book. It did end on a full-on cliffhanger, which left me a little bit salty, but I was willing to see where the story was going. Then Cytonic came out, and it just was really meh, like just really underwhelming. First of all, it felt like the story got bored with the sci-fi genre and just like threw it out the window. Cytonic went full fantasy, at least that's how it felt to me. Now listen, I like fantasy, I read plenty of fantasy, but one of the things I liked about this series are the sci-fi elements. And the first book felt like it was promising this like grounded sci-fi setting, and then it just kind of got thrown out the window halfway through the series. Also, just in general, Cytonic didn't feel as tense or dramatic as the other book. There was this strange lack of urgency and stakes for me until at some point I just stopped caring what happens to the characters. The main threat from the previous books also became much less scary in this book. So, just overall, everything kind of slid into this boring mediocrity to the point that I'm honestly not sure I want to read the last book. This book just made me emotionally disconnect from the characters, so I almost kind of don't care how the story ends. I don't know. I probably will read the last book. I haven't decided yet, but the fact that this book made me doubt it is really frustrating. And look, if you loved Cytonic, that is great. That is amazing. I'm very jealous. But for me, this was such a huge disappointment, even more so because I was actually really excited for it. I thought Skyward had such potential. It had its own unique feel compared to Sanderson's other series. I really liked the characters and the dynamics between them. I loved all the action scenes. They felt tight and tense. I liked how grounded and contained the first book felt. I just wanted the series to be good, and Cytonic just came in and broke my heart. And maybe objectively, the book is not that bad. But as a third book in the Skyward series, it just made me really sad. I really wanted to love it. And maybe Defiant, the fourth book and the last book, will be the best book Sanderson has ever written, and everything will fall into place. But I still think it won't take away the sour taste that Cytonic left in my mouth. Okay, that is all I can say without spoiling everything. So let's dive into some details. Spoilers from here on for all the books in the series. You've been warned. So, I'll give some context first. Also, I am skipping over a whole bunch of details just because I don't have the energy to explain every single plot point, but I'll try and kind of explain the plot points that are relevant to the problems that I had with the book. So, basically, at the end of Skyward, we discover that humans were actually the aggressors in this vast intergalactic war until they were defeated, and the last remainder of them fled to detritus. The aliens decided that humans are too violent of a species to just be left alone, so they positioned their forces around the planet to keep the humans contained. So the humans are basically prisoners in a jail on a planet scale, with jailers who are absolutely terrified of them. Spencer also discovers throughout the first book that she has these special cytonic powers that allow her to travel faster in space by going through the nowhere, which is this place outside of time and space. It's basically hyper jumping, I guess, but going through this nowhere is dangerous. She can feel something sinister is watching her there, and at the start of Starsight, we find out what it is. It's these creatures called Delvers. Now, Delvers are these mysterious giant beings that can consume whole planets and seem to be attracted by the use of cytonic powers. They seem to be beyond human intelligence, vast and powerful, existing outside time and space. Something that can't be reasoned with, which makes them very, very scary. In Starsight, Spencer goes on an undercover mission to learn more about aliens, Delvers, and also to steal a hyperdrive that could help humans escape detritus and save them all. By the way, this is one of the things I didn't particularly enjoy in Starsight. In Skyward, we had this interesting contained setting of detritus. We had a fun cast of characters that we got to know throughout the book. We saw Spencer developing new friendships and settling into this like newfound family of fellow pilots. And I just wanted to see where the cast would go as a team, how they would function. But then in Starsight, all that just kind of got thrown out. We are dumped in a completely new setting, and we have a new cast of characters that Spencer needs to build friendships with. We barely see any of the old characters. Also, all the aliens that Spencer interacts with in this book just feel like humans. They don't really feel alien. They feel more like different quote unquote fantasy races, if that makes sense. You know how there's like dwarves and elves and stuff like that, so that's kind of how it feels. But then I do like my aliens super weird. And not every author's priority is to write super weird aliens, so I decided it's fine. I can handle this. We needed to expand the world a bit. We couldn't just stay on the same planet for the whole series. So alright, I accepted that this is where the story needed to go. And you know what? Overall, the book was fun, tense, fast-paced. I was on board. Then at the end of Starsight, Spencer's cover gets blown. She's cornered, she escapes into the only place that she can, the nowhere. Starsight ends with Spencer walking into this white portal, which is the cliffhanger ending that I really didn't like. I know this is part of a series, but I do like when each book in the series does have some sort of an ending that feels like an ending and not just like the story is stopped in the middle. But okay, whatever. Still, it wasn't a deal breaker for me. Now, in Cytonic, Spencer ends up at the edge of nowhere, where the real universe bleeds into the nowhere, and at the center of it all, there's this bright luminous sun called the light burst. The edges are filled with fragments of the real universe, various floating islands with different environments, and they're occupied by different aliens who form like rival pirate gangs and they fight for territory. Most of them, like Spencer, fell through into this weird drift in reality and they can't get back. This place messes with your memories, your perception of time, etc. And the longer you hang around, the more dangerous it becomes. Spencer is told that here she can find answers about the Delvers, who they are, how they came to be. And to do that, she needs to follow the path of elders, which is scattered around various floating islands. Obviously, along the way, Spencer is gonna meet a whole bunch of new characters, including this human adventure character who's been stuck in this weird place for the last 170 years, and he seems to have his own mystery. But basically, that's our plot. Spencer goes on a treasure hunt after exposition. And here comes my first problem. Basically, the whole of Cytonic, Spencer is, yet again, stuck in a completely new place. And all of those nice new characters we just met in Starside, got to know them, befriended them, well, you can forget about them. They basically don't show up. Well, some of them do, but most of them don't. We have a new cast of characters, yet again. And at this point, I just couldn't get attached to a whole new friendship group, right? And at this point, I just wasn't on board anymore. We just went through the same thing on Starside. Why are we doing this again? I just couldn't get attached to anyone from the new cast because I don't know if the next book is just gonna ditch them. And I found them all to be super boring. And I don't know if it was just because they were actually boring or because I got tired of having to get used to new cast every book, but I couldn't remember any of them. Well, aside from the explorer character that we met at the very start. And I only remember him because we spent so much time with him and because he's like really important to the plot. I don't know, maybe I'm just complaining and being nitpicky, but why does this series need so many characters? I get it with Stormlight Archive. It's an epic fantasy. Every book's like 1,000 pages, and it's gonna have 10 books. So, okay, it will have a gazillion characters. But this fun sci-fi YA rom, like, come on, don't let me remember so many names. I can't keep all of them straight. Another thing that bothered me a lot was how overpowered Spencer seems to be in this book. At least in previous books, her abilities seemed to be kind of unreliable. It was very dangerous to use them because of the Delvers. So it felt like there were some limitations, but here it just feels like she can do whatever the plot needs her to. Whenever there's some difficulty, her powers just conveniently present her with a solution. It just feels like hand wavy magic powers, and I think that's what makes it feel less like a sci-fi setting and more like a fantasy setting, for me at least. She basically can eavesdrop on conversations light years away, exactly the ones that she needs to hear. She can talk to her love interest back at home. She can basically teleport, but that's fine, I guess. She can find her way home when she needs to. It just feels like her abilities are not constrained enough and also not defined enough. Also, we get a lot of more information about who the Delvers are in this book, and suddenly they can be reasoned with to an extent. The book attempts to give them like a proper motivation and backstory, and Spencer just seems to very easily get away from them whenever she's in danger. So all of that combined just makes them seem not scary at all. So the only limitation we did have on Spencer's powers now feels kind of weak and toothless. We still have a whole book where they will have to fight the Delvers, but we've seen so much of them in this book that they just stopped being scary. So it made me feel less invested in the next book. Another tiny little gripe, and this is just like a personal pet peeve of mine, is there's a character who dies in Starside who comes back to life in this book. And it's just a trope that I kind of don't like at all when stories do that. To be fair, it's usually not a deal breaker for me. If everything else was amazing about this book, I probably wouldn't have minded. But because I was already annoyed, this this just stood out to me like a final nail in the coffin. When that happened, I was like, no, why is this character here? They should be dead. Also, in general, compared to the other two books, this book has just this weirdly relaxed atmosphere, which is so jarring. In previous books, there was so much tension, it felt like we were getting closer and closer to this big clash between the humans and the alien, the Delvers are threatening all of them, everything felt desperate, time was running out, and then suddenly with Cytonic, everything just screeches to a stop. All the tension we've built so far completely disappeared. Most of this book spends is just having fun, frolicking through this brand new world with her cool new adventurer friend. From a narrative standpoint, I guess the idea was to explore Spencer's personality away from like this constant stress of war and annihilation. And it kind of makes sense, but it just comes at the expense of all the momentum the series has built so far. This book feels so disconnected from everything that happened prior. We don't really know what's happening on the outside. On the inside, nothing feels like it matters. All the conflicts between the pirate gang feel kind of small scale compared to the events in the real world. All the new characters we meet are stuck in this weird dimension, which makes it feel like we might never meet them again, so no point in getting attached. All the new backstory and world building revelation just feel kind of predictable and not very interesting, especially since they're spread out very thinly throughout the book. Our main baddie's kind of declawed. The whole book is, like I said, basically a treasure hunt of sorts for backstory pieces. Like, this feels like a video game where you go from point A to point B to collect pieces of lore on the way. And the lore is kind of not very interesting, but there's no fun gameplay in the middle to make up for it. And lastly, the ending of the book, where Spencer finally makes it back home. It just left me cold. Even though it was supposed to be kind of emotional, she's finally back, reunited with her love interest, about to be reunited with her friends, but I just felt nothing. And I think that's because we haven't seen those characters for 2 books. I barely remember them. Any emotional attachment I had to them is kind of gone. And that's really sad because I really liked the cast of the first book. And now I kind of don't care. Basically, at the end, I was just left with this feeling of like, oh my god, thank god this book's over. I was just so tired. I think this is the only Sanderson book where I was just impatient to get it done because I've already committed to it. I didn't want to put it in the middle. I was determined to finish it, but I was just very impatient for it to be over, which is really, really sad. Alright, so these are all my complaints. Is this a horrible book? Not at all. On its own, it's a fun enough book. I'm sure there are people who will love it, and I can see why. But as part of a series that had such a strong beginning, it was just really underwhelming. And honestly, I just don't think Cytonic needed to exist since it feels like nothing happens in this book anyway. I think this should have been a 3-book series. Book 1, we meet our heroes, our setting, establish our conflict. Book 2, we explore the wider universe, we see a glimpse of the other side of the conflict, escalate tensions, ramp up the big baddies, which are Delvers. And then book 3, big kablam, everything comes to a head, however that might be. All the exposition that we get about the history of Cytonic powers, what the Delvers are, etc., can be sprinkled throughout the 2nd and 3rd book. Maybe we do have Spencer ending up at the edge of nowhere, but it's just a much shorter section. For example, in the lead up to some dramatic battle or something, she disappears and she's really needed and she's desperate to get back. Just making it short and snappy and dramatic instead of this whole drawn out book. Also, I think the final revelation of what the Delvers are should have happened somewhere really close to the end of the series, right before the big showdown or something, because I think them being these mysterious entities actually made them much, much scarier. The unknown is just scarier than the known. Our imagination is good at filling the gaps, so the longer we can stretch that, the better. Which would also help with Spencer feeling too powerful. The Delvers would still feel like a threat up until almost the end of a series. Having 3 books would also mean we wouldn't spend as long time away from the other human characters, and we'd just have overall a smaller cast of characters in general. There wouldn't be this feeling of repetitiveness of Spencer ending up in a new place with a new cast twice in a row. I think just in general would have made everything more fun and tense and concise. This book just felt like a filler. Like a filler episode in an anime. That's how this book felt to me. The only thing that we'll miss out if there's no 3rd book is Spencer getting the opportunity to be herself a little without the pressure to constantly survive. But then maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it can make the ending more bittersweet when the war's finally over and Spencer kind of realizes that she's not sure who she is anymore. Could be an interesting note to end on. But then, I'm not a writer. I don't know much about writing. I have never written anything in my life. So what do I really know? Anyway, to sum it all up, Cytonic is fine. It's just really disappointing after the first 2 books and feels like filler. So that is going to be it for today. I'm really sorry if this is someone's favorite book and I just spent however many minutes tearing it to shreds. But it just broke my heart a little and I had to vent. Anyway, see you next time. Bye.